the co-host. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of EduNext AI, where we continue to shape the future of education through artificial intelligence, innovation, and global collaboration. At EduNext AI, our mission is to empower educators, researchers, and institutions to embrace new technologies in designing learner-centered experiences. And today, we are incredibly honored to host a speaker whose work truly exemplifies this mission. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dorothy Juan Le Rabajante, a distinguished educator and scholar from the Philippines, and currently the Dean of the School of Education at Ateneo de Zamboanga University. Dr. Rabajante brings with her an inspiring journey through education. She began as grade school teacher in 2008 and over the years has held key roles in higher education as a college instructor, graduate school faculty member, and graduate program coordinator before stepping into her current role as a dean in 2021. She earned her PhD in educational psychology, specializing in human learning and development from De La Salle University, Manila in 2017. Her academic expertise is matched by her practical input since 2009. Dr. Rabajante has served as national trainer for teacher development programs across the Philippines, collaborating with a wide range of NGOs and institutions. Her work extends beyond the national borders. She has contributed to local and national research projects, trained educators on curriculum and pedagogy, and recently represented her country in the International Visitor Leadership Program, IVLP, funded by the US Department of State. She joined the Education in the Digital Age cohort in November 2024, a testament to her global leadership and commitment to advancing education in the 21st century. Today, Dr. Rabajante will lead a session titled Designing the Learning Experience Strategies that Spark Learner Engagement. In this session, she will walk us through the psychological and pedagogical foundations of student engagement, offering the strategies that are practical, research-informed, and ready to implement, especially in digital and AI-integrated learning environment. We are grateful to have such a dynamic and visionary leader with us today. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Dorothy Juan Le Rabajante to EduNext AI. Let us get inspired and learn together. Dr. Rabajante, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noha, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. I can see some familiar names in the participant list, and I'm very happy to see some of my friends over here. And I can see new faces also and new names as well. So, welcome to our session. Allow me to just share my screen. So as was mentioned, this is the session on designing the learning experience, strategies that spark learner engagement. So I have a short disclaimer. Not everything that you will hear today will be about AI, or these are not new to you, but I will offer you a discussion on a framework that you can remember whenever you design the learning experience, just beyond lesson planning. So let's start with some house rules just to add to what Dr. Noha said earlier. So during this session, we have kept the chat open for everyone, and we hope that everyone will be respectful at all times, especially in the kind of language that we use coming from different cultures and nationalities. Let's also participate actively. I have prepared some activities, short activities for you, and most of this will be done here on the Zoom chat. And I hope that everybody will also type in their responses. If you have queries and insights, you use the chat box, and please mute your microphone during the session to avoid noise distractions. And if you can, please turn on your video if your internet connection is strong enough. For this session, it will also be helpful if you have another device that is connected to the internet or open another browser on your laptop because we have a Padlet activity later on. Our session will flow as follows. We'll talk about the 6 learning blocks for designing the learning experiences of our students, and this can be sometimes online or in person. And how do we tailor fit that design using the mismo framework of Habi Lab education? So we'll start with a session check-in just to get to know who you are here in the chat box. So I would like for everybody to please participate. In the chat box, type a tool or equipment that best represents who you are as a person and briefly say why. You can follow this format. For example, we have hi, I am, and then you put your name, blank, what's your occupation, from where you come from, your country. I am like a or an, and what is the tool or machine or computer or an equipment, because blank. So I have here my own sample. Hi, I am Lay, although my name is quite long, right? Dorothy Joanne Lay, but you can call me Lay. I am Lay, a teacher from the Philippines. I am like a camera because I enjoy capturing wonderful moments. So I invite you to type that in the chat box. I will give you 1 minute. So for those who just came in, we're doing this short activity. Follow the format and the sample on the slide. Our fastest hand here is Hans. Thank you, Hans. Welcome from the Philippines. We also have Salwa. Thank you. Welcome to the session. Nermeen. We have Aza. Ooh, interesting. Hello, Magdi. So we have here teachers. We have a student. Okay, we have a senior supervisor of English. Welcome, Allah. We have Sherry Han, teacher as well. Interesting answers in the chat. I invite you to read over the responses of our participants. We have Eman. Welcome. Hello, Jan. From the Philippines but based in Thailand. Hello, William from Botswana. Pam from Botswana as well. We have Hala from Egypt. Mr. Mohammed from Egypt. Hello, Maria from Nigeria. Okay, we have Aya, chemistry teacher. All right. I'm going over your names and your answers very quickly. All right. So it seems like many of us here are in the field of teaching and learning. So most of you are teachers. We also have one student. And some of you, although not directly teaching, you are also trainers. So again, everybody, you are welcome to this session. Thank you very much for participating in our short activity. All right. So first is I will discuss what are the 6 learning types. All right. But before that, I have here a task for you. And you're just going to answer this on a notebook. If you have a notebook or a pen or pencil and a piece of paper beside you, I'd like you to just list this and keep this to yourself for now. List activities that you ask your students to do most often as part of the teaching and learning process. So think of at least 2 activities that you ask your students to do. But for those who are non-teachers, list activities that your teacher most often asked you to do when you were a student. So just like Hans, who is a student here, what are some activities that your teacher or your teachers ask you to do? So I'll give you maybe 30 seconds to just write that down on a piece of paper. So of course, you can write as many activities as you can. Okay? We're not talking about learning styles for now. We're talking about activities that you do. You ask your students to do. So you can write that down on a piece of paper for now. All right. So I asked you this question because this will be the heart and core of our discussion today. We will talk about the 6 learning types. What are the 6 learning types or the 6 learning blocks? So this, if you're familiar with Dr. or Professor Diana Laurillard, this is her presentation. So let me just share my audio as well very quickly so I can share the video for a while. All right. So I will play this video, and don't worry because later on I'm going to explain this in more detail.
If the learner is listening to the teacher, or watching a video or demo, or reading a book or website, that's learning through acquisition. It's very common in education. It creates the opportunity for the learner to develop concepts, but it doesn't require them to do anything. All the other types of learning activity do. If the learner is going to the teacher or the library or the internet to find out something, that's learning through inquiry. It's a different way of reading a book, more under the control of the learner. And they have to come up with a question, evaluate what comes back, search again. It's a more active learning process, enabling that conceptual process to keep developing. If the learner is asking questions of other learners or answering their questions, exchanging ideas, challenging each other's arguments, that's learning through discussion. Listening and responding, articulating and arguing, they're all opportunities for the concept to develop. And if the teacher sets up a learning environment with a task goal, the learner then has to generate an action, interpret the feedback, and maybe think about the relevant concept and try again to get nearer the goal. This is learning through practice. And suppose you get the students working together on a project where they have to produce a shared output, maybe a diagram or a definition or a design or report. This is learning through collaboration. It's different from discussion. Having to produce a shared output means they have to negotiate their ideas in practice until they agree. So in the process, they're challenging each other and providing peer feedback to develop the best output they can. Even more opportunities for integrating and developing concepts in practice. And finally, when students are producing something for the teacher to evaluate, that's learning through production. Again, it may be a plan, a website, a performance, a theory, an analysis, but having to produce a public presentation of what they've learned is as important as getting feedback from the teacher. Many opportunities for integrating and developing concepts and practice. Together, all
All right. So that was the quick video. This time, what I'll ask you to do is I will play the video again, but this time I want you to be able to differentiate what is the difference between learning through this discussion and learning through collaboration. All right. So let me play that again, especially for those who just joined us.
if the learner is listening to the teacher, or watching a video or demo, or reading a book or website, that's learning through acquisition. It's very common in education. It creates the opportunity for the learner to develop concepts, but it doesn't require them to do anything. All the other types of learning activity do. If the learner is going to the teacher or the library or the internet to find out something, that's learning through inquiry. It's a different way of reading a book, more under the control of the learner. And they have to come up with a question, evaluate what comes back, search again. It's a more active learning process, enabling that conceptual process to keep developing. If the learner is asking questions of other learners or answering their questions, exchanging ideas, challenging each other's arguments, that's learning through discussion. Listening and responding, articulating and arguing, they're all opportunities for the concept to develop. And if the teacher sets up a learning environment with a task goal, the learner then has to generate an action, interpret the feedback, and maybe think about the relevant concept and try again to get nearer the goal. This is learning through practice. And suppose you get the students working together on a project where they have to produce a shared output, maybe a diagram or a definition or a design or report. This is learning through collaboration. It's different from discussion. Having to produce a shared output means they have to negotiate their ideas in practice until they agree. So in the process, they're challenging each other and providing peer feedback to develop the best output they can. Even more opportunities for integrating and developing concepts in practice. And finally, when students are producing something for the teacher to evaluate, that's learning through production. Again, it may be a plan, a website, a performance, a theory, an analysis, but having to produce a public presentation of what they've learned is as important as getting feedback from the teacher. Many opportunities for integrating and developing concepts in practice. Together, all 6 types of learning activity cover most of what you're ever likely to ask of students.
All right, so that's the end of our video. So I have here some responses in the chat box. The difference between the two is that, as you've said, we have here Salwa, in collaboration, they need to come up with a decision they all agree upon. Yes. Samia said they share a final product in collaboration, also providing feedback to support each other, and a discussion from Aya. Discussion depending on exchanging ideas, but collaboration, working together to produce something or solve a problem. Manal said, learning through collaboration means to negotiate to produce something. Thank you for those answers. Let's have a quick recap of the 6 learning blocks. So we have here the 6 learning blocks. And according to Dr. Diana Laurillard, these are called learning types because they're called learning through acquisition, learning through inquiry, learning through collaboration, learning through discussion, and learning through practice and production. So what she's saying here is that people learn in different ways. And she's offering this framework to tell us that our students also can learn in different ways. Okay? So when we talk about acquisition, what's the keyword here? The keyword is acquire. When our learners listen to a lecture or podcast, or just like what you're doing now, you're listening to me, that's acquisition. You're reading from books or websites or watch demos or videos, just like what we did with the video earlier. That's acquisition. So in this learning block or the learning type, which is learning through acquisition, Professor Laurillard said that this is the only learning type that does not require students to actively do anything because they just have to listen, to observe, maybe to remember some of the things, but they're not going to give you an output, okay? Because they're just going to absorb. All right. Next is learning through inquiry. And the keyword here is inquire. When we talk about inquire, you ask the learners to explore, to compare, and critique the texts, documents, and resources that reflect the concepts and ideas. So in inquiry, what students do is to ask questions. They research, they interview, They try to look for responses or to answer what their questions. They also try to reflect. So these are things under inquiry. That's right, sharing hand in the chat box, inquire and ask. In collaboration, we have here, oh, discussion first, sorry. In discussion, we have here when the learners articulate their ideas and questions and challenge and respond to those of others, that's discussion. So in discussion, they don't need to agree on anything. Okay? They have to just they just have to look at or hear the different opinions and viewpoints of the members of the group. So they may not necessarily come to a an agreement at the end. So for example, here you have activities like debates or maybe just presentations, sharing of ideas where they are just given their an opportunity to share what they want to share or related to the question or the topic. Next is collaboration. When the learners work with others, like discuss, practice, or produce, and takes part in knowledge building or acquisition and inquiry, that's collaboration. Because as you said earlier, they have to agree and work with others so that they can come up with a decision. They have to negotiate on something. They have to ultimately agree upon something. So that's the difference between the two. In discussion, they may not necessarily agree, and that's okay. They can just exchange viewpoints. In collaboration, they have to work with others, work together in a group. Next, we have practice. So practice in this learning block when the learners adapt their actions to the task goal and use the feedback to improve their next action. So an example of practice here would be worksheets. You have here, let's say, a return demonstration. That's an example of a practice. Students just practice the skill and they adapt their actions to accommodate what they have learned or to do a task goal. Keyword here that I want us to remember for practice is the feedback. The teacher has to provide a feedback for the students to utilize, and it will become an input to know what to improve in their practice. Finally, we have the sixth type of learning, which is learning through production. So learning through production is when learners use or consolidate what they have learned by articulating or creating something that shows their conceptual understanding. So in learning through production, they will come up with something. There's already an output that they have to do. And this production may be done individually or with others. So, I have here a short task for us. Remember the task one earlier? Earlier, I asked you to list activities that you ask your students to do most often as part of your teaching and learning process. Or if you're not a teacher, to list down activities that your teachers in the past have asked you to do when you were a student. This time, I invite you to go to this Padlet. Let me just type the link very quickly in the chat box. So there's a link, or if you have a phone, you can also use your phone to scan the QR code and it will lead you to a Padlet. So again, the link is here in our chat box. It's bit.ly/6blocks. All right. So I'm going to flash that on the screen. Give me a moment. So if you're familiar with Padlet already, this is a very easy activity. Padlet is one of the tools that I use in my class. I really like Padlet a lot. Okay, so let me know if you can find the link here or if you're able to join, because right now I don't see anyone yet in the Padlet. All right. So in this Padlet, you will see here that the 6 learning blocks are already outlined by column. And I also added below a picture and the description about the learning block. What I like you to do for now, maybe for 3 minutes, is to type or add the activity that you listed earlier in task 1 under the appropriate column. So please classify the activities you listed according to L'Oreal Yard's Learning Design Framework. type your responses on the appropriate column. So I will give you maybe 3 minutes for that. So if you want to add an answer on a particular column, for example, your answer is lecturing, you are doing lecture in your class, then that is under acquisition. Click the plus sign button here, and then um, you just type your response here on, it says write something beautiful. So for example, lecture. When you're done, you just click submit and it will automatically go into that column. All right. So 3 minutes to type. So make sure that you classify your response according to the type of the learning design. So for those who just came in, I'm going to type again the link in the chat box here on Zoom. Please head over to the chat and you can find the link which will lead you to our Padlet. So far, there are about 15 participants already on Padlet. Okay. Let's look at the other columns. All right. Thank you for the responses. So 1 more minute to type your answers. So now there are 32 people in the Padlet, including myself. Okay, wonderful ideas. Thank you so much. Keep adding your responses. What I appreciate about your answers here is that some of these answers are very specific to a discipline or to the learning area that you are teaching. So it reflects the subjects that you're teaching, whether you're teaching maybe literature, English, or let's say a language, or probably, as I can see here as well, science, probably, or even math. Okay, you do world cafes as part of, let's say, your inquiry, just a research method. Okay, maybe 30 seconds more. All right. Thank you very much for participating in that activity. We are not done yet. Okay. So go back to the Padlet, and this time, what I want you to do is to like or vote. Okay, there is a heart shape below each answer. I would like for you to like or vote the activities listed that you think are correctly classified under each learning block. So this is our way of checking if the answers placed are correct. Okay? So again, I just want you to vote by clicking the heart below the response, right? Below the answer of of our colleagues and other participants. If their answer is correct, I want you to please click the like or heart button. So let me just go back to that. So for example, we have here under acquisition, let's say sorry. Under acquisition, the first one you have here maybe read lectures or use website. So you can click the heart heart button here. So I will give you 2 minutes to go over the responses and also just to check the answers of our colleagues by voting the answer. So as you're doing that, I'm just going to type again in the chat box the link of the Padlet for those who just joined us. So you can see our Padlet, or you can put in your responses as well. Okay. So you can also see now the activities that have the most number of votes. All right. Let's try to go over some of the answers that you have written here for acquisition. Okay, this is quite long, but maybe just look at some answers. Reading lectures, reading silently or listening carefully, yes. Reading the summary of a passage, lecture. So as you can see here, for acquisition, most of our answers are reading, watching, or listening to podcast. What about for inquiry? Some of the answers, problem solving, finding information, treasure hunts. These are the responses that you can see. Debate, For practice, these are the answers that you have written. So I'm just going through them very quickly, just for the others who could not see the Padlet to very quickly look at the answers. For collaboration, okay, group presentations, think, pair, share, that's correct. Group discussions, doing puzzles together, For production, okay. Project research, tech race, presentations, create experiments, project-based learning, and the other answers. All right, thank you so much for those responses. So the Padlet will continue to be there so that you can see or you can continue writing your answers later. But for now, I have here some questions, and please type your answer in the chat box. Which block had the most or the least entries? Which of the 6 types of learning blocks had the most number of answers? Why do you think so? And what insights or realizations can be gleaned from your experience of this task? What did you realize about that? So I'll give you maybe 2 minutes to type your answers in the chat box. Again, the questions are on the screen. Which block had the most or the least entries? Why do you think this particular learning block has the most number of answers or has the least number of answers? And what insights or realizations did you glean from this task? Okay, thank you so much, Nermin, our fastest hand. What about the others? I invite everyone to just participate in the chat box. Okay, more answers are coming in. Thank you so much. And most of you answered that acquisition has the most number of entries or most number of answers. Because as you said here, it's very common, it's the easiest. And somebody mentioned Nermin, the first one who answered in the chat, it's the oldest and most traditional. Right. Hearing stories, right, from our ancestors, from the elderlies, that's learning through acquisition. Listening to their lectures, listening to their stories or maybe their accounts of events. Maria also has a very important point here. It's the easiest one and also the most familiar to all of us. What about the least? The least type of learning. Learning through. Okay, we have an answer. Okay, production is the least. I think that is also a common answer in the chat box. Why do you think is production the least common? Or the least popular in the Padlet? Someone also said here, inquiry is the least because though is the least even though we use it a lot. That's right. Actually, we're not very conscious, but actually we inquire a lot, right? We ask questions a lot. And many of our activities in class probably require inquiry or inquiry. Sherry Han here has a very important point. As production, it may be the least because it requires more planning from the teacher. El Sayed also makes a point. It needs more facilities or maybe materials or equipment. All right. Wala also points out the Bloom's taxonomy. It's acquisition is the bottom of the Bloom's taxonomy. Timothy here said production is probably the least popular in our Padlet because it is a demanding task. And Nermin says that production is at the top of Bloom's taxonomy. It takes effort. It needs a lot of preparation, resources. Production requires igniting creativity and thinking outside of the box. Because Allah said it is the hardest one because it represents understanding and application of what they grasp. It needs time. Okay, very important points. Okay, I'd like to read this response by Jan. He said, acquisition had the most response while practice had the least. Acquisition is the most common traditional ways to learn. In many cultures, students are not given chances to speak their mind or even ask questions because it poses rudeness toward the teachers. Hence, inquiry isn't really common, particularly in Mekong countries. Thank you for sharing, Jan. Okay, so thank you very much everyone for those responses. Um, what about you as a teacher or as a student? In your own experience, what kind or which of the learning blocks do you usually use in your class? When you were classifying those activities earlier, when you were putting them in the classification or in the columns, what did you realize about classifying those tasks? Which of the columns or the learning blocks do you usually use in your classes? Okay, thank you for the responses in the chat. You have collaboration, practice. Okay, that's a very important point, Wala. We use them all according to the objectives, and that's right. Because, of course, we'll have to look at what is our learning target, and then we match it according to the competency that we want our students to have. Very important point. So you have here acquisition and practice from Maria. Pam said discussion. Dr. Sama said practice. Okay. Romeo said production because usually all the learning types are being activated when we make production. That's right. Um, and these learning blocks, they're not really taken in isolation. They can be combined in one activity. Okay, thank you so much for the answers. We have from Antonio, Shalima, Alshima, William, Salwa. Okay. All right. Very lively interaction in the chat box. Thank you so much. Now that we know the framework of Dr. Diana Laurillard about the 6 learning blocks, as I said earlier, these are not necessarily new to us. Okay? It's not new. We already know this and we're actually doing them already. But when we talk about engagement in the classroom, whether it's online or offline, Dr. Laurillard said sparking engagement starts with designing. Okay, designing how our students interact with content, with others, and with themselves. So I'd like you to pay attention to the interactions that happens here. When we're talking about designing the learning experience of our students, we're not only planning a lesson, okay? So we call this, in some countries, this is called LXD. Okay, LXD, Learning Experience Design. I'll type that in the chat box. Okay, so in many countries, teachers do not anymore think of just planning the lesson. They think about what kind of blocks or what kind of activities will I put in my lesson, or when I think about my lesson, how am I going to design it in such a way that their experience in my class will be not just worth their while, but will indeed target the learning objectives that I have, right? So it's very important to look at when you are designing an experience of the students, you think about designing how will my students interact with content. And when we say content, this pertains to the lecture notes, the session guide, the handouts, the videos that you want them to do. And then how do you want them to interact with others? When you say others, this includes the teacher and their peers, their classmates. And finally, interaction within themselves. So this requires reflection and also thinking about what are clarifying with metacognition, what are the things that I do not um, that are not clear to me. What are the activities that I have problems completing? What are the contents that I have problem understanding? Okay, that I have a problem with understanding, or I have a comprehension concern. So this is what we call learning experience design. Okay, so it's not LED but LXD, just like experience. Okay, and that is the trend now. We think about designing the experience. So when you think about experiences of your students, think about what they will feel in the class, what they will do in the class, what they will see in the class. Now, let's have a quick typing in the chat activity. So, if you're thinking about designing the learning experience of your students and we want them to be engaged, Dr. Laurillard said there should be a combination of these blocks. So, for now, I'd like you to describe in the chat box what learner engagement looks like. Here are some prompts. What are the students doing in that class? If you want your students to be engaged, very engaged in the class, how does that look like? Okay? Have you ever been in a class, or for those who are trainers, have you ever been in a training group where the participants are engaged? What are they doing? What signs tell you that the learners are engaged? What facial expressions or body language show that students are interested or excited about learning? And how do learners participate during activities or discussions? So I'll give you 1 minute to type that in the chat box. How does that look like? So describe it in the chat. Okay, we have fast hands in the chat box. Thank you. All right, so we have answers here from Magdi. They answer, they act, and they feel happy. Okay, from Hans, they're engaged to the engaged students connect their classroom learnings with their own interests. Okay, thank you. They're interested in the task. They ask questions. Sonia made a very important point. Students ask many questions. Have you ever been in a situation where, just like me, I'm also teaching right now and I teach college students. Sometimes I ask them, class, do you have any questions? And they don't have a question. Probably because they want to end the class already and go home, you know? But one thing I learned is in my years of teaching is that when you just ask your students, class, do you have any questions? Sometimes they may not ask questions. So what I ask them to do instead is formulate your own question. I ask them to stop and think of a question about the content that was presented. And oh boy, it's going to be a coaster of discussion because now they're thinking hard about what kind of question will I ask. And some of them are really trying to be witty or creative in the kind of question that they ask. So it makes them also that learning through inquiry makes them also clarify the things that are not yet clear to them. So that's a very good point. Sonia Mahmoud, thank you, ma'am. They're sharing, listening actively. They ask questions. All right. Very good answers in the chat box. Thank you, everyone. Okay, there's a response here. They maintain eye contact. They use their hands. They have a healthy noise. I like this answer. Um, some teachers, I don't know if this is also something that you were thinking when you were a young teacher, because when I was on my first year of teaching, I thought that a class without any noise is the best class, especially if my supervisors are going to observe my class or if they're just passing through my classroom. I want my students to be behaved, no noise at all. But over the years, I have learned that that is actually not the case all the time, right? There is what we call productive noise, or as was pointed here in the chat box, healthy noise. That's right. When our students have this, it's like a buzzing sound in the classroom, like, when everybody in class starts talking, of course, you have to set some rules like no shouting in the classroom. But when everybody is engaged in the class, they're also discussing the content. Just like BCBs, like Aza Adele said in the chat box. So that's very important as well. So again, it's not true that if the class is silent, then it is a best class. Not true all the time. Of course, they also have to be quiet sometimes when you have to discuss and they have to listen, but there should be opportunities for them to discuss. Okay, very important responses in the chat box. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. So that is what learner engagement looks like. Now, there are three types of learner engagement or student engagement. And if you are a researcher, you can look this up in many research studies. So these are the ABCs, okay? ABCs of learner engagement. We have affective domain. I'll put that in the chat box. Affective domain is what we call, or is a term that we use for the emotions. How they feel in the class, in your class. What kind of emotions do they feel? As you said in the chat box, they feel happy, they feel excited, they're curious. That is also affective engagement. Then we have B. We have what we call behavioral engagement. That's in the chat box as well. Behavioral engagement pertains to how they behave. If they're doing the task, if they're leaning forward, for example, um, they're also like, for example, they're also participating in the task. That's how they behave. And lastly, we have the cognitive engagement. Cognitive engagement, or letter C, pertains to their thinking process. How deeply are they thinking about the task or about the content? What are the things that go into their mind as they are listening to to their peers, to their classmates, or to their teachers? All right. So very important. So it's very good that we have this understanding of engagement, that learner engagement can be in three ways. We have to pull them in their how they feel, how they behave, and what they're thinking. Now there are certain emotions that our students carry with them when they come to our class, and sometimes we don't have any control over that, right? Because, for example, if you have had students perhaps before coming to school, they had a fight with their parent or maybe with their sibling or with a classmate, they may not have a very good mood in your class. And of course, everybody is a human being. So some of them may be carrying problems as they come to your class or to your session, and they're not very ready to participate. So we have to understand them in that situation as well. So that's effective engagement. Now, when you talk about strategies, if we go back to this quotation by Dr. Diana Laurillard, that if we want to spark engagement, it has to be that our sessions should be designed carefully, and that this design will have to go with how our students interact with the content, with others, and with themselves. So when you talk about engagement strategies for the 6 learning blocks, we have here some activities that you have already mentioned in a way that will make their engagement better. When you talk about acquisition, as you have said earlier, it can be through watching videos, listening to lectures, reading assignments. To do this, we have to chunk the multimedia and give them prompts as well. So I usually do this in my class before I ask my students to come to class. In our learning management system, maybe on Google Classroom or on Moodle, I already provide them with a video or a handout to read, and I give them a question to answer. So the question here is just for them to think about what they have read or what they have watched. For inquiry, you can use, of course, this is about research using web quests, like what Romeo said earlier. Like we have Tech Race, for example. You give them a task and they will look for the answers on the internet. Okay, so that we call that the web quest, like an online treasure hunt. So they're going to hunt for answers online. And or they can do data gathering like what you said earlier, World Cafe, or you do an interview. You look for sources, for example, you conduct an FGD, you record something. That's inquiry. So for this, for if you want your students to be doing learning through inquiry, then you have to provide them real world problems, or this should be student led discovery. And many of you are doing this already earlier. You mentioned about case analysis, right? So that's very good. For discussion, we have here peer feedback, debates, online forums. So even in your learning management system, you can put there a discussion box where they can just interact. And then use structured discourse and thinking routines. So provide opportunities all the time, as much as possible, for your students to discuss something. Now, this is one of the mistakes that I have made as a new teacher. During discussion, I would usually just force them to come up with one answer. But sometimes it is also healthy for the students to just exchange ideas and just challenge each other's ideas. They may not necessarily agree on something. So it depends, again, it depends on your learning goal or your learning objective. And then we have here collaboration. So for collaboration, as you said earlier, you do group projects, you do co-creation or jigsaws. So jigsaws are like you have an activity and each participant in the group has a particular role, just like a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, you put together something that you can contribute to the group. So here it's very important to emphasize shared goals because in collaboration, they will agree and negotiate to come up with something. What are the roles and accountability? They have to be accountable as a member of the group to the group. And then we have here practice, experiments, skill drills, language exercises. So here, if you want to do practice, you have to conduct simulations or low stakes return demonstration with feedback. That is what we call practice. Now, if you remember the video earlier of Professor Lorillard, the key goal here is to give them feedback and that they will use this feedback for them to improve their learning. And for production, we have here making videos, essays, infographics, or presentations. And to do that, you have to assign them project-based learning activities or portfolios. They'll come up with a product that they will do individually or in a group. So these are just some of the things that we are already learning, and it's very important to go back to them when we design our learning experience. Let's have a quick activity. What do you think are the learning blocks that I used in this session? When I designed this session, what do you think are the learning blocks that I used? Can you list them in the chat box? So I'll give you 1 minute. So our fastest hand here is Hans. How? Acquisition and discussion. All right. Inquiry. Discussion, inquiry, practice. Production. Thank you very much for those answers in the chat. So actually, this is the learning design that I did for this session. So if you remember my first task earlier, aside from, of course, asking you to introduce yourself in the chat box, I asked you earlier to think of at least 2 activities that you ask your students to do most often. And this is a form of reflection. Some of you typed it in the chat box. So this is inquiry because this is reflection. Remember, reflection is more of finding out something. Okay? And then I led you to watching a video or you listened to a synthesis earlier. And that is acquisition. So that's right. That's the next learning block that I used for this session. If you remember, after that, after we discussed the learning blocks, I led you to an activity where you classified the activities and then you voted the activities on Padlet. So this is actually production because now we produced a list of activities. Okay? Maybe it can also be practice if you want to use practice as a word for that because we also practiced classifying those activities from the discussion earlier. And then we did some discussion over that. And finally, when we did this processing earlier, I asked you which block had the most or the least entries. That's inquiry. And then, well, it was also a discussion between you and me. All right. Although if we were in a face-to-face training right now, I would have wanted you to do think, pair, share. Turn to your seatmate and share your answers. So overall, these are the things that I placed in my in this learning the learning design of this session. So when you think about planning your lessons, think about how do you want to design the learning experience? How do you want your learners to experience learning? Here's an example of what I do usually in my own class. So because I follow the flipped learning approach in my classes. So if you're familiar with the flipped learning approach, it's just putting the um it's interchanging assignment and lecture. So it's the flipped learning approach is contrary to the lecture type. For example, the lecture type, right? The teacher comes to class, gives a lecture, gives an activity, and then assigns a homework, right? That the students will do at home. In the flip learning approach, we flip that. So the flipping is lecture at home, homework in school. So instead of asking the students to do the activity at home, they will do that inside the class. And the lecture, which I was supposed to do a lecture, which is like what, 15-30 minutes, which will eat much of the time, I ask them to view that before they come to class by watching a video or doing or reading a handout. In that way, I am freeing up my limited time with my students so that we can do more discussion and more activities together. So in that design, I'm sharing here my own design of the learning experience for my students. Before the class, I ask my students to read a handout or watch a video and answer questions about the content. So this is something that they do on our learning management system. In our university, we have two. We use our e-class via Moodle or we use the Google Classroom. Now, when they come to class during our class time, we do I group my students to discuss their answers to the questions about the content that they viewed before coming to class. And here, at the end, I synthesize it and provide additional input to deepen their understanding. In this way, it frees up the time for the classroom. Instead of me giving the lecture, it's them articulating what they have learned. So my goal is during the class, my goal is to clarify misconceptions or to look at what are the things that are not yet clear to them. And usually we a lot more time for practice and inquiry. Here we provide opportunities for the students to practice the new skill and to ask questions. So with this design, I free up the time with my students by putting the acquisition part outside the class. That is before they come to class. Now, sometimes I also encounter students not watching the video or not reading the handout. And that's okay because I still provide them with some handouts as they come to class. But those who have answered the activity before coming to class have a great advantage because they are able to provide more inputs during the activity. Here's another design another way of designing the learning experience. Perhaps at the beginning of the class, you can group the students and ask them to come up with a solution to a case or a problem. So here you are activating two learning blocks, and these are production and collaboration. And then you ask the students to group their you ask the students to discuss their answers by group. Here you synthesize their responses and connect it to your input if you have a content to share or a mini lecture. And finally, before you end your session, you have the students work again with their groups to solve new cases and research together how to solve it. However, some teachers may not usually do this because it requires planning and also it requires sometimes great um, great preparation to make the learning experience work based on the design that you have. So we have here I have here a question. What do you think will happen to students if the teacher only delivered a lecture for the entire period? Can you type that in the chat box? If the teacher only gave a lecture for the entire period, what is the learning experience of the students like? Well, lecturing is learning through acquisition. And some teachers may do that. All right. Thank you for the responses in the chat box. Very fast hands. There's no engagement. Maybe their hands here said maybe only about 25% is retained by the students. It's boring, it's passive, you miss their motivation, they may sleep, they may engage minimally. All right. They may easily forget. There could be little learning. What about if the teacher asked the learners to create a product right after a lecture? So let's say the learning experience of students is just this. The teacher provided a lecture and then they produced their own outputs. What about that? Okay, Eman said, maybe that is teacher-centered. Okay. Dr. Hala said, that's 50% learning. Oh, Riham said here, they would copy from ChatGPT. That's true, sometimes. One way to ensure that our students really understood what they have learned from the topic is through ensuring that they're able to articulate what they learned from AI. Sometimes they just use the generative AI like ChatGPT or Gemini to answer the question for them. But in the class, when we provide them opportunities to discuss, that's when we see if they indeed understood what they have researched. So thank you very much for those responses. So one thing that I want you to remember is that when you think about the learning experience of your students, remember that it is like designing a lesson. The question here is always to think about what kind of experience do you want your students to have? How do you want the learners to learn at the beginning, the middle, or the end of your class session? So for you, I'd like you to maybe put in the chat box for 1 minute the way you teach. What are the learning blocks or what is the design of the learning experience of your students? How do you usually teach in your classes? So type it in the chat box. You can choose the answers from the blocks that I have placed here in the on the slide. What learning block do you usually start with? How do you begin? What is the middle? And how do you end your session? So if you're comfortable sharing that, you can type it in the chat box. Our fastest hand this time is Sherihan Morsi. Acquisition, discussion, production. Okay, thank you. So Maria also said here, acquisition, collaboration, and maybe practice or production. Okay, more responses? Oh, practice. Thank you, Maria. All right. So Wala also here is saying that she does flip learning approach. During the class, they manage to discuss, collaborate, and practice and produce. Thank you for sharing. Very wonderful answers. So you have your design. And what's nice about planning our lessons now, this is not new to us, but we now have a more maybe more awareness this time. When you design your sessions or you design your classes, you can alter the blocks, okay? Do not be monotonous. Sometimes you can start with inquiry, maybe you can start with collaboration, you can start with production sometimes, or you can start with acquisition. So every day or maybe every week, you can change your style. Again, it will depend on the learning objective that you have. But always remember that the learning experience is one of the things that you have to think about. Now, I would like to end my discussion with this framework. Because this is also one of the things, if you are going to design the learning experience of your students, you have to think about who are we designing learning experiences for. And the source of this is Habi Education Lab. So this is MISMO framework. Mismo in the Philippines, in our language, Filipino, mismo means exactly. Okay? So it holds a particular meaning as well for us. But for you, you just remember MISMO. All right. Now, in the chat box, very quickly, when planning a lesson, what are the things that a teacher should prepare? When you're planning a lesson or designing your lesson, what are the things that you usually prepare? Or if you are a trainer, okay, Sama is our fastest hand. Activities, data, defining my objectives, resources, sheets, activities, lesson plan, experiments. Thank you very much for those answers in the chat. Oh, you have teaching aids. Okay, thank you. When we prepare these things, I'd like you to think about later on if any of the MISMO has been covered in your answers. Okay? When we plan our lesson, we have to think about MISMO. MISMO stands for our mindset, our intended outcomes or the objectives, our student context, the modular steps, and the options and alternatives. Let's start with the first one. So when you design the learning experience of your students, think about your own mindset. What will be my role as a teacher? What am I good at? What is my view of learning and teaching? How would all these influence the learning experience? So, for example, my answer would be I am the facilitator and I believe in experiential learning. So, the activities that I should do in class should be authentic and relevant to my students. These things will become my guiding principles in designing the learning experience of my students. So, here, in a way, our mindset talks about ourselves, how we think about ourselves and our students. What is our teaching philosophy? And that will very much reflect on the kind of preparation or the learning experience that you are going to do for your students. That's letter M. Next, we have letter I. I is intended outcomes. So as you have said in the chat box, you prepare the objectives. That's right. What should learners have in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitudes after going through the learning experience? So, for example, in this session, for example, in a particular session that you want to do, you want the students to know the basic process of learning experience design, just like what I did here. I want you to do simple design exercises. I want you to feel empathetic toward the experience and perspective of learners. So usually your intended outcomes are already outlined based on your curriculum or the competencies that you have outlined for your class. So it's important that you go back to what is my goal for this class. Because sometimes you may be carried away. You want the students to be doing a lot of things, but these things are not actually connected to the learning outcomes. Next is the student context. In the student context, we ask ourselves, who are our learners? What motivates them to learn? And what would make it difficult for them to learn? So, for example, if your target learners are teenagers, if you're teaching in, let's say, among high school students or even college students, if they are teenagers, think about home. H stands for habits. Describe the learners through habits, behaviors, and actions. And then we have obstacles. What would make it difficult for them to learn the intended learning outcomes? So think about each student in your class and anticipate or predict already what would be their obstacles in learning. We have M, the motivations. What would encourage them to learn? What gives them delight? So, for example, usually this is also what I do. Um, when I do some teacher training, and this is among adults already, one of the things that sometimes motivates the teachers is if you give them a prize. When I was a grade school or elementary teacher in the primary grades, my pupils before, they're small children, their faces would light up if there is a prize. But that's not only true for small children. Sometimes even adults get excited if you give them a prize. So what are the things that will motivate them? For my when I taught very briefly teenagers for a while, who are not college students, I realized that these adolescents are motivated with praises. Okay, they like affirmative feedback. So I would usually give them genuine affirmative feedback, which are realistic. So I don't praise them just for the heck of praising them. Of course not. because they will know if it is not genuine or not, if it is not genuine, right? So you have to know what is it that motivates your students or what motivates your learners. And the environment. Where are they when they are accessing the learning experience? Describe in terms of physical space, social context, or digital space. So this is very important. So for example, in our university, because I use the Google Classroom, not everybody in my class has a laptop. Some of them are just using their phones, their smartphones, to access the content in the Google Classroom. So because of that, when I ask them to, let's say, type something, or there's a task where they're asked to write a paragraph or to draw, let's say, a diagram or a graphic organizer, I recognize that not everybody in class has a laptop. And so alternatively, I give the students an option all the time, an option to just draw or write it on a piece of paper, take a picture of that output, and submit it in our Google Classroom. In that way, I'm able to see and understand their situation in their environment. So, student context is very important because regardless of how beautiful your learning experience design is, if it is not fit according to the context of your students, then it will still not be aligned with them. So ensure that we know them, what are their habits, what is it that they like. If you're like me, sometimes I also try to learn new words that speak to the Gen Zs now, no? So maybe what are the words that they're using, what kind of music do they listen to, what games do they play, and that is an important part, to know them at their level because of the generation gap that we have already. All right. The next M, the second to the last answer here is M, modular steps. What does the learning experience look like and what is the scope and format? So this is just like what we did earlier. Think about how are you going to plan your lesson? What is the scope and format of the learning experience? Would it be face-to-face session or a live online session just like we're doing now? Is it going to be a self-paced activity available on the LMS or a Google Classroom? And then give them an outline. Give an overview of the learning experience in terms of modular steps. So here's a tip. Start from the end goal and work backward. Someone mentioned in the chat box earlier, backwards design. That's right. Or meet where the students are and build forward. So here, think about what you want them to learn and then decide what learning experiences or what learning blocks will I bring them to so that they will reach that target. And lastly, options and alternatives. So, always and always, according to this framework, give your students an option or alternative, just like what I mentioned earlier. In extreme cases, are there any extreme cases or special needs that we need to consider? Think of differences in context, access, and ability. So think about students who may not be able to do the task before they come to class or attend before this live online session. So if I ask my students, because I'm using the flip learning approach, if I ask them to do something at the before coming to class, I have to think about an alternative. So look at the second column. What options and alternatives have we incorporated into the learning experience to address these cases? So for example, if my students did not do the pre-session self-paced task before my class, then I can provide them with an option and an alternative. Add a deadline on the self-paced task and use it as a check-in, or allow the students to finish the task before the day ends. So always think about an alternative. Sometimes, look at the second one. Students' output is incorrect. The output, their responses are incorrect, even with examples and prompts. So here you can provide an alternative, explain parts that were not understood, invite students for a special session as a form of academic consultation, such as a tutorial or maybe a remediation session. And last one, we have here students could not join the live online session just like now, maybe because of internet problems or internet concerns. So you can record the online session and post the recorded video in your LMS. So in my case, I have placed here my example, my Adzu e-class or the Google Classroom. So the point here is just that when you think about the learning design, think also about alternatives. If my students cannot participate here or do this task, what is my alternative? When you plan your lessons, remember the mismo framework. M stands for mindset, I stands for intended outcomes, S stands for student context, M, modular steps, and the last O is options and alternatives. So if you remember, this is Jamboard in the past. So I think Jamboard has already retired from Google, right? But when you think about mindset, these are some questions that you have to remember. What will be my role as a teacher? What am I good at? What is my view of learning and teaching? How would all this influence the learning experience? Intended outcomes. What should learners have in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitudes after going through the learning experience? What should they know, do, and feel? For student context, who are our learners? What motivates them to learn? What would make it difficult for them to learn? So, home here stands for what are their habits? What are the obstacles to their learning? What are their motivations? What kind of environment are they in? For modular steps, what does the learning experience look like? What is the scope and format? You have to list the learning experience blocks that you want to include. And lastly, for options and alternatives, are there any extreme cases that we need to consider? Think of differences in context, access, and ability. What options and alternatives should be incorporated to address these cases? In summary, I'd like to end this session with this statement, which is usually attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. Maraming salamat po. Maraming salamat po means thank you very much in our language in the Philippines. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in our session today. So now I turn you back over to Dr. Noha.
Thank you very much. As we come to the end of this inspiring session, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank Dr. Dorothy Juan Rabajente for sharing her deep expertise, passion, and practical strategies with us today. Your insights into learner engagement and educational psychology have sparked important reflections and conversations that will no doubt influence the way we design learning in our own contexts. On behalf of Edu-Next-AI and everyone in this session, we are truly grateful for your time, your energy, and your commitment to reimagining education in powerful human-centered ways. Thank you also to all our participants for your presence and engagement. Your questions, attention, and curiosity are what made this session meaningful. Let us carry today's insights forward as we continue building a smarter, more connected, and more inclusive future in education. Thank you again, Dr. Dorothy, and thank you all. Before we close, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our amazing volunteers, Iman, Aya, and Rasha, who helped make today's session possible. Your support, whether behind the scenes or during the live session, has been invaluable, from managing the chat and assisting participants to helping with logistics and coordination. You made everything run smoothly. Your dedication and teamwork truly reflect the spirit of Edu-Next-AI collaborative innovation and learner focus. Thank you for giving your time, your energy, and your passion to this community. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Dorothy, for so much. I truly appreciate what